This is very exciting. Hi, I'm Dale Peterson, and this is the Unsolicited Response Show. Before I bring on my guest for this episode, Andrew Ginter from Waterfall, I wanted to just give you a quick update on S4. It seems like it's just ended, but a lot of things are actually happening. We are putting up 2 videos a week from S4 24 on the S4 Events YouTube channel, one from the main stage and then one from stages 2 and 3. So you'll see those roll out. And if you had a favorite video you wanted to look for, we have the schedule, the release schedule up on s4xevents.com. The sponsor packages are out and most of them are gone. I think they're about 75, 80% gone. So if you are a vendor and you wanted to sponsor and you don't have your application or your contract signed, contact us right away at s4@digitalbond.com. And lastly, and this is probably most important for the audience, is we're less than 2 months away from the call for presentations. That comes out on June 15th. So you want to start thinking about if you want to be up on the S4 stage, if you have a project or a cause you're passionate about and you want to reach the influencers, you want to be ready on that June 15th date, because the earlier you submit, the better your chances are to get on the stage. And with that, I just want to put one more caveat out before I bring on Andrew, and that is this might be a rough podcast. I've got painters who decided to start today, so we might hear a little bit of their noise and my dog reacting to them. Producer Liz is on a plane today, so I'm in charge of moving things around on the screen, so it's probably going to be a little rougher. But I think this topic is very interesting, so I'm sure you'll enjoy it. I'm going to bring up my guest here, Andrew Ginter, who is with Waterfall Security Solutions. Andrew, I was looking at your bio. You started in 2000 in OT security when you joined Industrial Defender. Was that your first OT endeavor? I'm not hearing you, Andrew.
My apologies.
No worries. Okay.
Yeah, that was where I got started in OT security. I was involved in OT before that, building middleware products, building HMIs and historian products back at Hewlett Packard, and before that, at smaller ventures. So yeah, that was the I've kind of been involved since the beginning, because roughly OT security started in about 02, 03 or so. I mean, there were academics before then. So I've kind of been there since the beginning, but I was kind of out of the public eye for the first 10 years, working in the back office, developing product at Industrial Defender, developing the world's first industrial SEM, and some failed products before that. Nobody wanted mandatory access control on their control systems back in 03 when we built them.
Well, we have, I guess, a little bit in common, because I started in 2000 as well. And that was when I did my first SCADA security assessment. And back in 2000, Industrial Defender wasn't even called Industrial Defender. So it's gone a long way. But you worked there. But for the last 13 years, you've been with Waterfall Security Solutions. Current role is VP of Industrial Security. And most people know Waterfall. Everyone calls themselves the leader. But it's very clear that Waterfall is the market leader by market share in one-way devices, which Waterfall likes to call unidirectional. And besides that, you've got a podcast, the Industrial Security Podcast, and you've written 3 books. The reason why you've been on the show most of the times is for a book review. The latest one is Engineering Grade OT Security. I believe we have an episode up on that. But the reason I brought you back again, Andrew, is I wanted to talk about my favorite annual report in the OT security industry. The 2024 Threat Report, OT Cyber Attacks with Physical Consequences. So I can actually let me bring that up. So that's kind of the front page of the report there. And we'll be talking about the report and some of its facts and what we can glean from it. I think one thing to make clear at the beginning is that this is a 2024 report on incidents that happened in 2023, correct?
That's right. Absolutely. And I'm delighted it's your favorite. It's my favorite, but I'm biased.
Yeah. I think that the reason I like it so much is a lot of the other reports, I'd say the numbers are very difficult to analyze because they cover all sorts of attacks that happen on companies that have industrial control systems. So it's really hard to tell, were they even interested in the industrial control system? Did it have any impact on the industrial control system? But I pulled out your scope statement in the report, and it says to be included in the report, the incidents must be deliberate attacks with physical consequences in the public record in covered industries, which included building, automation, transportation, manufacturing, heavy industry, and critical infrastructure, industrial infrastructures, which would probably be water utilities, electric utilities, pipelines, things of that nature, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And if I could jump in, you haven't asked the question, but there's sort of two perspectives on the genesis of the report. I mean, I used to work for Hewlett Packard 30 years ago, and back then HP produced what was perceived by the world as amazing technology, and they weren't able to market their way out of a wet paper bag. They would sell sushi. They were accused of selling sushi as cold, dead, day-old fish. Technically accurate, but not very appealing. So the cold, dead, day-old fish interpretation of the report is that this is the data we had. We do not have confidential disclosures. We don't have our own security as a service with a data feed that we can summarize and say, no, well, it's all confidential. Can't show you any of that. All we have is the public record. The sushi version is that we wanted to produce a report that was, in a sense, indisputable, because there's too many reports out there where there's confidential disclosures where you look at the numbers and you can't tell what they mean.
Right.
And so we wanted something that was what people could read and they would know what it meant, and hopefully would motivate them to action in terms of improving their cybersecurity posture. Both the sushi version and the cold dead fish version are true.
Yeah, and I would say the other annual reports, there's a lot of good work. There's good people putting them out, mostly companies, a lot of times trying to show the threat, and because they have a threat detection solution or some other solution that would benefit from people being concerned. But I don't even include them in my Friday news and notes anymore, just because they tend to be repetitive, the same sort of things. You're seeing big numbers. And again, you can't pull out the gems. You use the sushi and the old fish. I'd say it's more the gems from all the rest of the dirt and other things that are being dug up. It's so hard when you look at those reports, because the big numbers, the exciting numbers, are actually the ones in those reports that aren't that interesting. Because and we'll see as we get into this, there are not that many public interesting attacks going on right now, or in public attacks that we know about that have been made public that had real impact on cyber physical. But let's dive, just to make sure we're clear on the scope, because this did confuse me a little bit. If a system had to move to manual, physical action was required, but the end user was not affected, is that included? And I thought like Aliquippa, because I saw that was listed as a near miss, and yet there was public disclosures that certain control system components were put out of service, but that was not included, right?
That's right. Two things. One, so let me answer your question, but then sort of make a bigger observation. We count physical consequences. Not so much physical consequences on the people operating the physical process, unless one of them is injured, but physical consequences on the process itself. And the process, a water treatment plant, a pipeline, the pipeline, the metal of the pipeline and the fluid flowing through it, the water being treated, doesn't care that computers are controlling it or people are controlling it. If the same quality, the same quantity of product is coming out of or moving through or being serviced by the physical process, we don't count that as, and there was a cyber attack in progress. We don't count that as an incident. That sort of, it's the physical process we're focused on. And sort of the second observation is, and we may get into this deeper into the report, is we've documented the inclusion criteria. We've documented the decision criteria. It sounds clear cut. In fact, there's a ridiculous number of gray zones, and we might get into some of these. You've gone mute.
Thank you. I was trying to avoid the hammering outside my window here. Again, I told people it's going to be a little rougher than usual. I guess this one would be a gray area because I thought I would agree with the decision, but I was thinking, well, there was a period of time where they lost the ability to either see data or control data while those were down before they switched to manual. So maybe it was just a matter of hours, but there was some impact. But then let's look at a different one. The recent Texas water case in Muleshoe, I think it was, or was it Muleshoe? I think it was Muleshoe, where a water tank was overflowed for a brief period of time. A few thousand gallons of water went out. Would that be a candidate for 2024 because something physically moved in a way that it wasn't supposed to, even though it was probably equally minor?
And that's sort of a gray area. Did the consumer notice? Maybe
No.
not. I mean, if there was a mess around the tank, they might have noticed.
Yeah.
My instinct, I mean, we debate these things. We have a team of people who look at these things, and when there's corner cases, well, we sit down and we hash it out. What you see here is sort of a groupthink result. My vote would be the water tank overflowed. It was arguably a minor physical impact, but it was a physical impact.
Yeah.
I would vote for counting it. But we have other experts in the team. The older I get, the more I respect their opinions. So we'll have to see how it works out.
Okay. I think that's fair. And I would say to, if you're interested in this and you go through the report, towards the end of the report, they have the data on each incident in a table or chart. And they also have the data for near misses. And I think a lot of those near misses, Aliquippa was in there. That's kind of the gray area. You say, well, it almost made it. So you can kind of get an answer as to whether it's there or not. Now, if we get into the numbers, let me put up the chart here. So this is the chart.
If I may interrupt you before we leave near misses, these are not all of the near misses. These were near misses that we thought were noteworthy and we could draw a lesson from. So that's the criteria for including near misses. Okay,
makes sense. So there could be some near misses that just weren't that interesting, but were near misses. Okay,
absolutely.
Thanks for that. We had in 2023 there were 68, which is a 19% increase. You can see there in the graph. You see the slope. It was a 19% increase from 57 the year before in 2022.
Yep, that's the two rightmost blue columns. The red one is a projection.
It's a projection. Okay, great. Yes, because we'll get into that. You're projecting 100 for next year, but let's hold off on that. So you do see that we were getting some, 100% increases in the last couple of years, and then 2023 was a little bit less. And I think it was even you mentioned in there that it was less than expected.
Yes,
by the team, which again, you're dealing with small numbers and people attacking things, so it's a little hard to get an accurate guess each year. But why do you think? Do you have some analysis or suppositions why it was less?
We do have ideas, and you should bear in mind that this is interpretation. This is us looking at the data and saying, here's what we think is going on. It's not hard evidence. We could have just said, look, you see the chart, it's kind of doubling every year, but it's noisy. It's small numbers. There's a degree of randomness involved. And we could have left it at that. But there were some other sort of noteworthy developments that we thought were worth commenting on and might have contributed to the size of the increase. So on the one hand, the new SEC filing rules and similar rules all over the world. The Germans have rules that require, reporting incidents. These rules would tend to increase the number of disclosures over last year. We did not see the increase we expected, so that's not, in a sense, what's driving a smaller than expected number of increases. We would expect that to drive a larger than expected number.
But just holding on that for a second, I saw that in the report, but the SEC rules didn't come into effect until November.
Yes.
So they were kind of projected, or they were drafted, and then they had an in effect date. So I do think if you were a public company in the second half of the year, you maybe were more inclined, like we saw with Clorox, to disclose.
Yes.
Than you would have been before those. But I think we're really going to see the impact of this in 2024. Now
Yes.
that they're fully out, and you're seeing lawsuits if you don't disclose things and things of that nature.
And we expect two impacts. One is a larger number of disclosures because it's the law now. And, in the data set 68, of the 68, 6 of them, so give or take 10%, we saw reported only in SEC disclosures. There was no other coverage of the incident. So that number we expect to increase. There was a larger, and the other sort of thing that we think is relevant is that the number of, we have a sort of a cause field, I forget what we call it, attribution, trying to say, who's the threat actor? Is it a ransomware criminal? Is it a hacktivist? What class, what type of attack was it? That the unknown increased. And gut feel is that some of that was due to SEC disclosures being picked up and reported in the press with very little additional clarification. In the press. So it looks like the press saw it in the SEC filing and reported on it, but didn't have any more data than the 2 sentences in the SEC filing. And so the reports were very skimpy. So we didn't call up the reporters and find out, how did you report on this? But, my instinct says that there were more unknowns because there were more SEC disclosures, and some of them, got some skimpy reporting, but really they were just SEC disclosures. But if I may, what does that mean for the big picture? This would tend to increase the number of unknowns because you don't see a lot of detail in these filings, and would tend to, in a sense, aggravate other factors because the actual numbers of known causes that we can attribute and say ransomware did this and something else did that would tend to get smaller.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
But there is another. There's another factor we should come to, which is trends in ransomware. But go ahead with Clorox.
No. Let's talk about that first.
Okay. So the other effect that we've observed is, and again, it's reading thousands of these wretched reports. We don't have hard numbers on it, but it looks like we're seeing, some of this is being reported in the IT press. We're seeing a larger fraction nowadays of ransomware attacks that do not encrypt the target. They steal information and hold the information to ransom, as opposed to stealing information and encrypting the target. What we observe is that most ransomware does not, there's no report, there's no indication in the public record. Ransomware doesn't appear to be targeting critical industrial infrastructure deliberately. They seem to me to be targeting hospitals deliberately, but that's a different kind of critical infrastructure. If you were targeting critical infrastructure deliberately, you'd encrypt everything because that's what cripples the infrastructure. So combine those two effects, and it looks like a smaller fraction of ransomware attacks than usual, than historically, are encrypting things and thereby causing malfunctions. A larger fraction is stealing information. And what we are what makes sense to me and to the rest of the team, we wrote this up, is that look, this trend, the motives of the ransomware threat actors are going to change for a period of time, and then they're going to stabilize, or at least this aspect of it will likely stabilize. At which point you will see encrypted attacks starting to look, to increase year over year in a way that is similar to the overall growth of ransomware. And that's currently running 60 to 70% per year in intelligence agency reports and Microsoft's reports. So we did not see 60 to 70% this year, and we think it's in large part because of changing ransomware tactics.
Well, you have another part in the report that really caught my attention. When you were talking about ransomware, you talked about, and you were talking about the high percentage of attacks that only affected IT, only affected the enterprise, did not affect OT. And then they said, for the events, this chain gets a little bit confusing, but for the events that caused a physical impact to the system, that the attacks that only got to the enterprise network, and this was primarily ransomware, there were two main reasons why things were shut down. One was out of an abundance of caution. And you see that exact phrase in a lot of reports that companies issue. So in that case, I don't know if the encrypting versus exfil of the information would really matter in your abundance of caution, because your caution would be, bad guy's on my network, I don't know where he is. And then the other reason that clearly would be a case where there'd be a difference between exfil versus encryption is when encryption or some other attack has caused a system on the enterprise that's required, such as a billing system, a scheduling system, a shipping system, that has said, we don't have what we need to run our process. That's the case that we've seen in a number of that. That was the classic Colonial Pipeline case, although they also used abundance of caution as a term. But I found that very interesting that you kind of were seeing those two different things in the report, but there was no data in terms of the percentages of those that I saw in the report.
There is actually.
Okay.
If you, I don't know.
I'll dig deeper in it. So then if someone wants it, you do break those down. Do you remember which one was more prevalent?
Yeah, there's a chart. In fact, I've got the chart right here. Here we go.
What page is it on?
I've got a different version of the report. It's on my page 3, probably your page 4.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, not page 4. I take it back.
This is well. I'll look for it. But why don't you talk to it if you can?
Yeah.
I do see this chart, and this is another interesting chart that we can probably talk about. This is the chart that shows direct versus indirect.
That's right. So look at the next page.
So this is kind of interesting because, again, what we're seeing, and I've mentioned this in the last 2 keynotes or intros that I did for S4, that we're really seeing, if you're talking about what is really affecting people, it's not people getting on OT and attacking OT. It's people getting on IT and then it being shut down for one of the 2 reasons that you mentioned, an abundance of caution or the fact that they are missing a third-party system.
Yeah. So
there it is.
There you go. That's the one. So, a large fraction, the largest fraction is abundance of caution. And, there were reports, you mentioned Colonial, there were reports in Colonial that it was shut down because the billing system was crippled. In fact, the CEO testified under oath that it was shut down in an abundance of caution. It was the supervisor of the control system that made the call. I'm not gonna call him a liar. To my knowledge, he was not asked as part of that inquiry. He was not asked if you were confident of the safety of the pipeline. could you have restarted it? That hypothetical was not asked. And to
Yeah.
me, that is where the custody transfer system, it's not a billing system, it's a custody transfer system. That is where that system would come into play. The textbook example.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to point out, because the way that was originally portrayed in the press was, if we're not going to get paid, we're not going to run the pipeline. And it was actually, no, you need to know what product to deliver to what tanks. And if you can't do that,
Yeah,
then
and
you
you've got to
really can't
measure
run
it.
a pipeline.
Yeah, you've got to measure it.
Yeah.
But the textbook example is maybe instead of all these hypotheticals about Colonial, the textbook example is Maersk shipping. This was back in 2017, the NotPetya incident. The ships' OT systems were not affected. The ships could come into port. The cranes' control systems were not affected. You could take the containers off of the ships and put them onto the waiting trucks. But the container tracking system was crippled, and you could no longer print off the waybills that the drivers would need to say where each container goes. And so you had to shut down shipping for 6 days because you couldn't figure out where your containers were going. So that's the textbook. But abundance of caution is a large chunk. These dependencies on container tracking systems, on other IT systems is a big chunk of it. A smaller chunk of it is direct impacts on OT. And in our estimation, most of those direct impacts are because, and again, limited information, but in our best read of the information, this happened mostly because the IT systems and OT systems were one network. There was no IT-OT interface. And so when you encrypt the IT network, you've encrypted the OT network. Everything goes around. So anyhow, we have some, if we look just at ransomware, I'd have to go look at the numbers, but eyeballing it, we're looking at of the known incidents where we could attribute what's going on, something like 40% or 40% were abundance of caution, 40% were dependencies, and 20% were sort of messed up the OT network. Sorry about that. There are other incidents. I don't know if you want to get into them separately, but there are other incidents that messed up the OT network actually deliberately, but that was more hacktivists than ransomware.
Yeah, and I think if we look at this chart again, let me see if I can make that a little bit bigger. You have, so I tried to count them up. I think I counted them up right from your chart. You had 45 known incidents and 23 unknown, or something very close, if within one or two of that. And then of the known incidents, 80% of those were ransomware. And then the other categories were hacktivists, nation state, supply chain, and such. I think one thing you could do reasonably is you could take those percentages and apply those to unknown. So you could, which I think you kind of did in the report by saying 80% of known were ransomware. My guess is 80% of everything was probably pretty close, give or take, 5 or 10%. Yeah. Was ransomware.
That's why we did that. When we say 80% of known, really, I think it means 80% of everything. You just, if we said, if you look at this chart, if you said, 60% of incidents were ransomware, that ignores the fact that we don't know what's going on in, 60, in another, do the math, 40% of incidents. When we say 80% of known, that takes sort of the unknown out of the math. And I agree with you.
And then the other thing about this chart and this would be a quibble, I guess, is it kind of mixes two different things. Ransomware is a type of attack, and then nation state hacktivists are types of threat actors. And I'd say supply chain would be sort of the same sort of thing. You could be a nation state, a hacktivist, a criminal going after supply chain, or sending ransomware in, or all sorts of things. So I was a little curious why you kind of mix these, because I know with limited data it's hard to do this, but did you give any thought to just having one or the other, or having two separate charts, one with the type of attack and another with the type of attacker?
We thought about this, and when we have a larger data set, then maybe you're right. Maybe we have to do that. What we did here is, again, we have a team that debates these things, and we looked at the words that we were using in the debates, saying, is this important? Is that important? We have to look at these numbers and ask, are they important enough to report on? Because there's a ridiculous number of numbers you can produce from these incidents. And we used the words that we were using in our internal debates. We thought supply chain, whether it be by nation state or by hacktivist or by someone else, was important enough that we wanted to call it out. So this is a judgment call, and it's likely to change in the future. Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. I think with the limited data, it's hard to get it exactly the way you might want it. Related to that a little bit, though, is the limited data. I was trying to get a feel, and I'm sure this is the case for you as well as for me, but I am aware, and I don't, I'm not a threat detection vendor with an MSSP and getting all these feeds in, but I'm aware of a handful of attacks with physical impact that aren't in your report. They're not public.
Yep.
And I'm sure there's a lot of others. Do you have any sort of feel as to the percentage of public versus total attacks that you're seeing? I mean, do you think you're getting 5%, 50%, 1%? Any thoughts at all?
My instinct, but again, the experts in the team debate this. My instinct is that we're getting most of them. By most of them, I mean at least 50% of them.
Okay.
That's my instinct. There's others who say, there could be as many as 10 times. I don't really buy that. I just have not had that many private disclosures. It doesn't feel right as the right analysis. What I will say is that I've had confidential disclosures, only a handful. Mm-hmm. I will say that I know we are missing stuff because most of what we search is in the English language, and we see reports in other languages that we stumble across. Really. Half the time it's because we've looked at someone else's list of 1,000 incidents and found a few of them and tracked them down, and they were only in German language or, other, Japanese reporting. And so we are trying to expand our search capabilities to be able to search more broadly. But even so, I've already answered the question. It's a judgment.
No, it's a hard question. I don't know the answer. That's why I was asking.
Yeah.
And I wonder, I think the category that's most likely to be missed are the ones that impacted the company, but not their customers. So the company had to shut down a line for a day or two, but they were able to work extra shifts and catch up, and line shut down for all sorts of reasons. So no one ever knew about it.
Absolutely.
And I think even if you're a public company, that would not necessarily be a material incident.
The big incidents are hard to keep quiet. I mean, how did we find out that 4 JBS meatpacking plants went down in 2021 because of ransomware? It wasn't that the company put a press release out. The union called the press and said, "We just got laid off. Something's going on," and it came to light. Smaller things like this where the customers have, shipments delayed for 2 days and they mutter about it, you might not notice. You're right. And sorry, there's a number we've glossed over that I should hit before I forget.
Okay.
We've talked about 68 incidents, and yes, they were 68. We count 68 actions on the part of the attackers. So, we counted, for instance, in 2017, we counted NotPetya, even though it affected hundreds of victims, as one incident, one action on the part of the adversary. putting a nasty into the auto update for the tax package. When so we've counted 68 actions, but we counted over 500 affected industrial sites, and that number bounces around. Not Petcha just went through the roof. So we've not actually been trying to chart that because there doesn't seem to be anything useful to learn from that. But just for the record, it wasn't 68 sites that were affected. It was a lot of sites were affected.
Yeah, and I think that's important. Although you do get that a little bit. The number that we're not seeing now that I'm hoping we'll see more with the reporting requirements when I look through the chart is the cost of the incident. So, for example, Clorox, we have a number. I think it's up to 49 million now. But most of the cost column was empty. Not because you didn't want it or didn't look for it, but it just wasn't out there. And you're using public information. You're not trying to calculate it yourself.
And we do estimate. No, we do estimate sometimes. If we heard something like, I forget, one of the manufacturers lost 17 days production, and the public report said they could not make it up by the end of the quarter because they were running at full tilt on the production line. They did not release a number of how much production was affected. So we can go to their report and say they produced this much in the previous quarter, 17 days over the number of 93 days in the. So we do sometimes estimate like that when we have credible information to estimate, but that would be lost production rather than financial impact on the company, because financial impact on the company is really profits and to a degree reputation. And so we do estimate this some of the time.
Well, and that's where it gets tricky. And I think Clorox is just a great example because I listened to some of their investor calls the quarters after the incident, and what they really were focused on was loss of shelf space in the stores. When they could not provide product for a number of weeks, something else went in their shelf space and they didn't get it back immediately. And they were talking about their efforts to get it back because that hit their sales number well after the whole thing was recovered. So it was kind of interesting. Two more things I want to hit, and also, throw it open if there's something you think we missed. With the numbers that we saw, that the 80% is ransomware on IT, and the report addresses this a little bit. But what should be the action by an asset owner if they say, look, what's most likely to happen to me by far is there's going to be ransomware on my enterprise network? What action should they be taking given this fact from this data set and from this year and last year?
This is in part why we reported on cyber-informed engineering. We tried to, report on the year, not just in terms of the bad news, but in terms of, positive developments in defensive postures. And with cyber-informed engineering, it's really applying, what I think of as engineering risk management approaches to cyber threats. And, engineers are worried about a lot of things, but the profession as a profession has a legal and ethical and, societal obligation to protect public safety, to protect national security. How is national security relevant? Well, critical national infrastructure is legally defined as critical to the nation. And so, when issues of public safety or national security or even environmental safety come up, the potential for massive discharges or something, the profession has a legal obligation to take reasonable measures to protect these elements. And so the question becomes what's reasonable, which is why I wrote the whole Gold Book, and I argued what was reasonable. We've debated that. What is reasonable, given that ransomware is getting into our IT networks and shutting down physical operations? Apparently not because they're targeting it, just because there's sort of side effects. To me, I look at ransomware, and there's intelligence reports. There's again, we don't do intelligence gathering. That we rely on the authorities. The reports are that ransomware is buying and selling, trading attack tools with nation states. The reports are that some ransomware groups, North Korea's, are backed by the resources of the nation state, because this is how the nation state, the sanctioned state, generates foreign currency. The distinction in terms of capability between the network-based nation-state attacks and the network-based ransomware attacks, that distinction is blurring and going away. And so we ask, is it reasonable? Engineers should ask, is it reasonable to say, well, because the ransomware criminals, they have the ability to shut us down and cause consequences we need to avoid. They have that ability, but they don't seem to have the motive right now. Is it reasonable to base our defenses on the motive of the moment? Or should we base our defenses on what our enemies are capable of? And that there's chapters in the book on how to make these decisions. But generally speaking, I think it's unwise to base a defensive posture on motives that can change very quickly. Motives change much faster than capabilities. And so given that the capabilities are out there, I think it is reasonable to say we see what's possible. We see how long it takes, how difficult it is to make any sort of material change in the defensive posture for our OT systems. I think the reasonable conclusion is we need to take what's possible and prevent it in our OT systems. That is the reasonable approach when public safety and national security are at risk. It's a different animal if we're talking about, my classic example is a small shoe factory. There are no safety risks. There's no public safety risks. Buy insurance, transfer the risk to the third party, do whatever they instruct us to, cybersecurity, do it religiously so that if we suffer an incident, we will get paid out. In the two circumstances, you do two different things.
Yeah, it's funny. I think we're at odds, and it probably goes back to our book discussion a little bit on that. One thing I saw in the report, though, that related to this, that I was, saying yes to, definitely, I was really glad to see it, was I don't think the response should be we need to deploy all these new security controls on IT to try to stop ransomware. Because I think you're just never going to get a level of assurance with all those people and all that internet access and all those applications that you'll get the level of assurance that it won't hit you. So I kind of have an intermediate step where I don't disagree with your cyber-informed engineering and forecasting motives, but I think it's important to address the motives that we're currently seeing and the reality we're currently seeing. So if you can't say that the impact of a ransomware attack on your enterprise network, that consequence is acceptable, it's not ideal, but you can live with it and you survive it and such, then you've got some work to do to get to that place. Which, again, we can go back and forth. I think you're looking more at the really bad things, and I'm looking at more at the most likely things. And you probably need to address both of them, to be honest.
And it's a complicated space. I mean, Dale, you and I've concluded that we disagree fundamentally, and I'm not even sure we agree on what we disagree on. It's that bad.
I think
you're right.
You're right on that.
The space is big enough and complex enough that people focused on different parts of the space are going to draw different conclusions.
Yeah.
And so,
well, let's hit one more thing.
Sure.
I wanted to put up one more chart, and I don't think this surprised anyone, but it is kind of noteworthy that more than 50% of the attacks were on manufacturing. Mm-hmm. Or not the attacks, but the incidents that caused a physical impact.
Yes.
To get the wording right. We don't know how many maybe manufacturing was attacked the same as everyone else and was just easier to get or something like that. We don't have that information in this report. But do you have any thoughts as to why this is, and do you expect this trend to continue?
We could not draw any useful conclusions here. I will offer one additional data point, which is the mix was quite a bit different last year. There's been a material, what appears to be a substantial change in the mix year over year. Last year, it was mostly transportation and a smaller fraction manufacturing. This year, it's reversed. We're still talking 68 incidents out of thousands of possible attacks.
Yeah.
Is this random? We don't know. Manufacturing and transportation tend to have more dependencies between IT and OT. Is this what's going on? We don't know. Has ransomware changed tactics again and nobody noticed? We said nothing about it because we couldn't figure out anything useful to say about it. Sorry.
And the only other kind of just no data, reckless speculation I have is that if you're a criminal trying to make money and you shut off people's power or water, you're going to get a bigger reaction from government. That's, anything that's a critical service for someone is going to get a bigger reaction. And you even saw that a little bit in Colonial Pipeline. The perpetrator that did it kind of said, whoa, we didn't want to cause the pipelines to go out. So I wonder if that's the fact that they say, well, these manufacturers, no one's going to get that upset if they go down, or they're going to get, the government will be less upset, will get less of a drive to take us down. But again, that's just reckless speculation. There's no numbers to support that.
Yeah, let me give you sort of the other side of the coin. It's also speculation, but we do not see that calculus being applied at hospitals.
Yeah.
People have, it's difficult to look at a hospital and say that person died because of this ransomware attack. But people have done the stats and said there's been enough ransomware attacks that we can say, people die in hospitals every day. To a degree, this is life. But you can look at the numbers, and statistically, more people die during these ransomware attacks than outside. And so people have attributed deaths, a head count, to cyber attacks on hospitals. And so it would appear that there's sort of serious stuff going on, yet government's not responding. Why did they respond to Colonial? It was nationwide. It was,
yeah.
So it's also speculation, but I don't know.
No, that's a really good counterpoint, and I can tell you, because I've looked into this a little bit, you can get better numbers from the hospitals because they have death rates, mortality rates based on time to get certain things done from the time you walk in the door. So if you say, well, you can't walk into this door, you've got to go to the hospital 10 minutes away, they can tell you that 10 minutes for someone who's potentially having a heart attack leads to this increased death rate. So they have really good numbers if you can track outages or time delayed to getting medical treatment to cyber attacks. But you're right. That should get the same reaction. So maybe my critical service thing is just completely wrong. Andrew, just to finish up, was there any other data or point or conclusion that you want to highlight in the report?
I'll just mention in passing, it was only 2 incidents, but supply chain is back. I mean, the big news years ago was SolarWinds. I listened to a talk by Rob Lee, the CEO of Dragos, about SolarWinds. He said, yeah, we were called in to remediate lots of OT sites, and because they had SolarWinds servers deep in the OT site, and discovered that there was zero impact on OT because no one had updated the servers since the bad stuff came out. So good for us, I guess. That was sort of big news. And we really haven't heard about supply chain in OT. Well, it's back. It's not the nation states tampering. It seems to be sort of more mundane. People are inserting time bombs or other nasties into products because they want to make some money. People are accusing the vendors of it. They're accusing contractors of it. So that's something to be aware of, is that there was the big news, and then there was a big push to do stuff about supply chain without a lot of OT incidents, it looks like it's starting to come back. This is just something to think about. What I worry about is that, supply chain is a way for the bad guys. I mean, I'm not even sure I mentioned it in the report. There was an incident, I don't know if it was last year, I think it was the year before, in the invasion of the Ukraine. The front line moves back and forth. When the front line moved towards Russia, apparently Ukrainian farmers were taking their $1 million John Deere tractors, driving into the war zone and dragging out dead Russian tanks and, I don't know, selling them for scrap or something. This annoyed the Russians. When the front line moved back, apparently the Russian army stole the $1 million John Deere tractors and drove them back into Russia. The owners of the tractors said, that's not good. And they called up John Deere and said, the Russians have just stolen our tractors. What are you going to do about it? John Deere said, well, we'll turn them off. And turned them off because these things are connected to the internet there. And the good guys went, yay, turn them off. Yeah, just a minute. What just happened here?
Yeah.
What if John Deere gets it into their head to turn off all of the tractors in Europe? What if the Russians break into John Deere? So the supply chain thing is something I worry about. And, to me, we mentioned it, we highlighted it you asked the question, why is supply chain mixed in with ransomware? Because I think it's something that is very much worth worrying about going forward.
Okay. Now, Andrew, where does someone get this report, the 2024 threat report? Where do they pick it up if they want to look at it?
It's on the Waterfall website, waterfall-security.com/2024-threat-report.
And we'll put that in the show notes as well. And if they want to contact you or listen to more of your thoughts, they can pick up any one of your 3 books, the latest being Engineering Grade OT Security and the Industrial Security Podcast with Andrew. He's one of the co-hosts on that podcast. You can get that wherever you get your podcasts. And on the socials, where do they find you?
Oh, I'm on LinkedIn. Waterfall's on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's probably the best one. And to be fair, I've been all about, you've been asking me questions. I've been answering as if it was, my baby. In fact, there's a team. The big contribution to the team that I've neglected to mention, Reese McNamee's at Waterfall leads the research, but this is actually a cooperative effort between us and ICSSTRIVE. Greg Hale is the editor of ISS Source. He runs the ICSSTRIVE, ICSSTRIVE.com incident repository. We reported on 68 of the 300 incidents in that repository. So if people are sort of interested in the bigger picture, we did not report on hospitals, but he has a bunch of hospital incidents. These are, this is a cooperative effort, and
Okay, definitely. And we'll include a link to ICSSTRIVE in the show notes as well. Okay, Andrew, thanks for coming on again. And I hope you just keep this report going year after year. And I don't know if I should hope we get more data. I hope we get a higher percentage of the data. So I'm not hoping we see more attacks, but I'm hoping we see a higher percentage of the attacks that are happening in the report. Thanks again.
Thank you.